I'm introducing my second interview with Jason Woodard. Now, if you missed the last interview, please go down to the show notes. Please listen to the first one because you'll start to get a framework of how Jason thinks as well as a bit of background on his company. In this interview, we focus less on anything kind of that was background for Jason and really focus on objective performance tools. And this is going to be a short intro. This is all I'm going to say. If your organization is struggling with retention or thinking that newer generations don't like to stay in one place very long, pay attention. Jason is going to share a lot of secrets to retaining people for decades instead of months or years. Enjoy. Welcome back, Jason. I am excited that we've got a second interview with you. We were talking just before this episode about stories. We're going to get a few stories from you here today. We're going to talk more about tools, using objective tools. And I find this a fascinating subject because for myself, I believe, so I'm trained in psychology. I've practiced a lot. I'm trained in certain skills. I'm able to pick up on things. And I believe that I'm excellent at figuring out who somebody is fairly quickly and making certain judgments about them. Not judging them, but making judgments about kind of how they're going to come across in certain ways or strengths or weaknesses, that kind of thing. What have you found as far as objective tools go, how often you're right or wrong? Because I find that even though I think I'm good at this, I get it wrong a lot of the time.
I was actually chuckling to myself when you were saying that because what I found is that we think we know, and the majority of the time we're wrong
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to using discernment skills, for lack of a better way to say it. When it comes to identifying the traits that are needed for successful performance in a job or in a role, um, and the what happens is whenever we're interviewing someone or whenever we have someone that's working with us, um, we naturally want that person to succeed. So we end up with a positive bias towards helping that person be successful. And we don't necessarily look at their ability to succeed from an objective position. And as we all know, humans are infinitely more complex than any single tool or measurement or assessment system can provide information on. The key is to be able to take some tool or some assessment system, tie it to something that's meaningful within your organization, and observe performance, observe whether you succeed or fail in your work. And then, it's the old plan, do, check, act cycle from the lean manufacturing world. You come up with a plan, you check your performance against it, you do your work, and then you analyze where it needs to change. So what I find is that, I tell people all the time is when you're interviewing people, remember, we have something they want. It's called a job. And we have a position that's open that we want to fill. So we naturally try to find a way to make those two things come together. And that quite often leads us to make some decisions that may not be in the best interest of either or both parties.
I like the way you've worded that because legitimately we are biased when we come to the situation. It's not like we're just going, oh yeah, if this works out, it works out this time. If we don't have the right person this time, we'll keep looking. We naturally want to find somebody fast. We naturally don't want to waste time. We naturally want to help people succeed. We naturally want to believe in people. All of those things are biases that will affect how we are making judgments, how we're making decisions. Okay, so let's back up a bit. How did you first get in touch with traits at the time it was called something else, but how did you first come across this tool?
So we had a workshop with Dwayne Fliss. Oh my goodness, probably in 2004, 2005, where we had all of our company leadership together, and he introduced the tool to us. He explained to us how the tool worked, what it was evaluating, what it was trying to measure with regards to a person, and he did an outstanding job of really driving home the point that if you want performance in an organization, you want people performing roles that most closely line up with their natural behavioral traits, and that there are different behavioral traits for natural or for high performance that are required in different roles. Um, I'm a Clemson football fan, so I used this analogy the other day with some people arguing about our recent defensive coordinator change. And I said, the traits to lead an organization, lead a department, are different from those needed to be a neurosurgeon. And the guy that we had in the situation was a neurosurgeon, and he's no longer with the team. And it's true regardless of what role you have in the company. The traits tool allows us, it gives us a way to begin to quantify the desired behaviors, to see what those are, and then evaluate and assess how closely aligned is a person's natural behavioral traits with what you need for high performance in a role. So last time we spoke, we used the good to great analogy. It helps you identify the seat, and it helps you identify who's best going to fit in that seat for any role in your company.
Yeah, and a couple of things that you mentioned that I really appreciated, Jason, is you said that in certain any organization, you're going to see certain profiles more often because you have certain roles more often. So somebody who's on the front line in a job that you hire a lot for, you're going to have similar people for that over and over and over again. You're going to start recognizing that pattern that you're seeing, right? But that you do have a lot of different seats on every bus. You're just talking about the defensive coordinator, and I thought, so what comes to mind as you talk about that gentleman is that he was probably really detailed. He was probably really good, kind of X's and O's kind of guy, but maybe not the best leader. Would that be accurate?
It would be.
Okay. Yeah, because this is so different. If I think about the people that I've met. So I was just hanging out with a guy an hour ago. He's worth $500 million. The guy has started from nothing. He started as a roofer and has created this really unique company. And he comes across as so he doesn't have a lot of education. He's the opposite of you, right? You've got a PhD. He has like grade 6, grade 8 education or something like that. And he can come across as kind of the average person you meet. But when you get to know him, you see how he works, you see how his mind works, you see how he leads. He is actually a genius. He's uneducated, but he's a genius at certain things. And then I think about my admin assistant. We get each other in trouble all the time because she's like, Mark, you've got to focus on this and get more detailed with these things. And I'm going, Lucy, you've got to focus on the bigger picture here. And we understand these things about each other, but she's a genius in her own right at focusing in on those details. And again, she would have more education than the guy I just spoke with. And yet he's making a lot more money because he's learned to lead in a very unique way using his traits. How have you seen that with yourself? Because you're both an educated guy and a leader with those leadership traits. How have you found that for yourself and others?
So I see there as being one big differentiator within what the traits assessment measures that speaks to this, and it's behavioral adaptability. And no matter what role you're in, the higher someone's behavioral adaptability is, the better off they are to relate to anyone along the spectrum of different behavioral traits, whether it's assertiveness or attention to detail and how those are related to one another. I happen to have very high behavioral adaptability, and people around my office call me a chameleon because I can adapt my behaviors to whatever situation. And it sounds like your friend that's the first thing that came to mind was his behavioral adaptability must be very high to be able to relate his genius and his intellect to people that need to understand it at a different level than he understands it. See that as being a very big differentiating factor to how leaders are able to grow their organization. The less behavioral adaptable they are, maybe the tighter the constraints over their creativity and innovativeness, or maybe even the breadth of organization they're able to lead. But the broader that is, or the higher that is, the greater their capability there. So we've definitely seen that in practice within our organization as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, again, coming back to that interview or coming back to what we're looking for in people, so often we're looking at education. So often we're looking at experience, which are valuable. Don't get me wrong. But I personally will always take the person who can be better in a couple of years with a little bit of education and experience than the person who's got experience up the wazoo, but can't necessarily grow or adapt or change or be the person we need in a certain role.
I would take it a step further and say that I would take the person that most closely aligns from a behavioral traits perspective to what the job requires for high performance. And if they're of average or better intellect, we'll teach them the technical skills.
Yeah.
And we'll give them the right environment to learn those technical skills over a couple of years. Than I would someone who has the perfect education, but might be the exact opposite from a behavioral traits perspective of what's needed for success in a role.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that based on the experience of having seen that exact scenario fail in our organization. We've made those mistakes and they've happened. We've taken engineers and made them project managers, which those are the complete inverse of one another from a behavioral traits perspective. For high performance, and seeing the engineer leave the company because eventually he was dissatisfied with the work he was performing. It just did not fit him.
Yeah.
And we hate to make those kinds of mistakes because they're painful.
Yeah, that's Dwayne Fliss's story, right? I mean, an engineer, top of his class, number one in his class at U of T, and then goes into the greatest, largest engineering firm in Canada kind of thing. And within a few months, they're like, this is not a fit. And he's like, I know it's not a fit kind of thing. It's fascinating how quickly you can recognize that in somebody. So maybe share a couple of stories. A time where maybe you had high expectations for somebody and they didn't meet those expectations, and maybe some disappointment you had for somebody because that those traits didn't line up. Or another time where maybe you wrote somebody off and they got a second chance at something, and as soon as you saw how the traits aligned with the role, it worked out really well.
Got two really good examples here. One is with an engineer. Young man came to us with a few years of experience, a very bright, very, very good personality, which I'm an engineer, so I'll make fun of us. So some of us don't have the best personalities, and we can be a little dense at times. But a good kid, very, very highly thought of and respected. Was a very, very good engineer, and someone that we had kind of tagged for growth within the engineering department. Decided that he wanted to move into a project management role. So he's gone from a technical specialist into an initiator type of position. And it was all good for the first year or two. And then over a period of time, you could begin to tell that burnout was starting to set in. And next thing we know, he's turning in his notice. And he's saying, I've got to go do something different. And part of it was he was going to move a little closer to where his family was. And we've been trying to get the guy back as an engineer ever since, and we can't get him back. And this was someone that we had identified as a potential star within the organization. He was someone that was earmarked for future development and investment from an organizational perspective. So that was a really painful lesson. And what made it even more painful was that we knew it going into it. We had his traits information. We knew what the challenges were going to be. Mm-hmm. But the last thing you want to do, sometimes you have to let people discover things for themselves. And you don't want people to believe or think that they have limits placed upon them by an organization because of certain things, because that could cause other problems. So we let him try it. And I remember the day we decided to let him try it, I said, we need to be checking in with him because in 2 to 3 years, he's going to be burnout and we're going to need to try to get him back into a technical specialist role. Well, things got too far down the road. Times changed. We forgot. And next thing you know, like all good employees, we didn't know anything was wrong until he turned his resignation in. And we lost him. And we, to this day, would love to have him back and would take him back in a heartbeat if he was to come back to us. Another real pleasant surprise, and this is where maybe someone's technical experience made up for what they were lacking in as a profile fit or a traits fit for a role. We had a gentleman who I had known my whole career with the company that wanted to take on a plant manager's role, which is within our business is very clearly a an initiator type of position. You got to keep things moving and solve problems continuously all day, every day for your whole career. And this gentleman was in quality control to start with. He was in scheduling to start with, both very technical specialist type roles, very detail oriented, not as much on the assertive side, although he had a little more assertiveness than most technical specialists do. But still, he was that inverse profile to what you would really look for performance in a plant management role. Well, we had a plant that was struggling, and you know the general manager wanted to give this guy a chance, and I was like, I don't know about this. I don't know if this is going to work, and here's why. And he said, well, we need to help. We're going to give him a chance. I said, okay, fair enough. And the guy was hugely successful in the role. And what I had missed was that the plant didn't need the initiator. The plant needed a teacher. It needed someone with the technical knowledge, because it was one of our newer plants. It needed someone with the technical knowledge and the knowledge of our processes and how we've done things, and more importantly, why we've done them the way that we've done them, to convey that knowledge to the people there who were doing the work. So they needed a technical specialist to help the technical specialists that were there learn. And he did an outstanding job for 2 to 3 years. And we got to a point where he wanted to move back closer to family. And I think we were also getting to the point we were stagnating a little bit, because eventually the misfit in the role does show up. It's just a matter of when, not if. And he ended up moving back to the plant that he came from in a technical specialist role, and he's still prospering to this day with us. So, one was a disappointment. The other one was, wow, I was wrong about this one. But when I go back and look at the situation after the fact, it made some sense as to why things worked.
Yeah, it's almost you were right about the person, but wrong about an interim role for a period of time to fit. So I'm going to ask you a deeper question about that. I really want your thought on this, Jason. So much of the time, and the questions that I get from a lot of clients are, well, okay, so we want to eventually hire for a more supervisory role or a more management role, a role higher up in the hierarchy of the company, but we want them to learn on the ground stuff. How long do you leave them in there? How do you find the person that is going to fit a higher role later on? And there's a question tied to this, and that is, and I'm not sure exactly how to word this, but I'll fumble my way through it. How do you identify roles like you just described, where eventually they need to be that leader, they need to be that initiator, but for a period of time, you need a different person for that role, because we are in a society where once somebody has a title, once somebody has something attached to their name, they want to keep moving up, and they can kind of see moving back to the engineering role or the technical role as almost a slap in the face. How do you prepare people so that they can be ready for those interim roles? So like, hey, 2 years, and then we're probably good. We're going to get somebody else in here that has different traits. Again, I'm fumbling through these questions. Where does your mind go as I'm talking through this? And what advice do you have for other organizations?
Well, one, it depends on your organization, but our organization, we really try to hire people that don't get too wrapped up on the title.
Mm-hmm.
And it's impossible to avoid that. And you're going to have it at any population, any work population. Um, the thing we try to do is just be honest, upfront, straightforward with what to expect. We run into this more with new hires, in that we kind of got a program that we put them through. You might call it the School of Hard Knocks, where they're going to spend time in departments that they're not going to work in, but they need a fundamental knowledge of, one, how the department works, who to go to ask for help and information in the role that they're going to be in eventually. And they'll go through a process like this for 2 to 5 years before we'll put them in a role that they were going to be in, or we had in mind for them when we hired them 2 to 5 years ago. And we tell them these things. We tell them up front, look, we know we're going to put you in some things that are going to make you uncomfortable. You need to understand that we know that you're going to be uncomfortable in some of these roles. We know you're not necessarily going to like some of these roles. Don't do anything rash without coming to talk to us. Because remember, we are trying to get you to a point where we're placing value on teaching you the business overall and the fundamentals of how our business works, so that when you get into that role of responsibility where you are impacting the business, you can be both effective and efficient. And we've done a pretty good job of that. And as fate has it, what usually happens is opportunity presents itself before the person's fully through a program or before they're ready, and we have to throw them into the fire and say, all right, get to work, and we're here to help you, we're here to support you, but we've got a need, we have to meet it.
So much of what you're describing, Jason, comes back to communicating and making sure that people understand what's happening. Hey, you're not going to be stuck here forever. This is going to feel a little bit like prison maybe for you. You need a bit of skill, you need a little bit of education here, but once that happens, we will put you in the right spot. How you doing? Checking in with people, exactly what you said about that engineer that you'd still like to have back. Checking in with people often enough that you know where they're at and you can gauge that temperature.
In our world. And the first thing they're going to do out of college is spend 3 to 6 months in quality control, inspecting and checking beds, which is the last thing that they want to do. And it will drive them crazy if they have to do it for too long. But we insist on them learning that perspective of our business because they've got to learn the products that we make. And they have to appreciate the challenges that are involved on a day-to-day basis with making those products. So, as I said earlier, it's about teaching them the fundamentals of the business and valuing the teaching of those business fundamentals over the, too many companies get wrapped up in this person's got to be contributing by a certain amount of time. Everyone has their own learning curve. They're all different, and it takes different amount of times for people to pick up on things. So, say, one of the next obvious questions is, well, how long does it take? And our answer is, it depends, and it depends on you. Some parts of the business you may pick up faster than others, and some parts of the business we may want you to spend a little more time in because it might be a little more important for what we see you doing down the road. And so we try to maintain flexibility when it comes to that. But more often than not, our hand ends up getting forced, and we end up having to put people in roles really before they're fully ready.
Okay, and coming back down to almost those roles, how do you identify roles where you're thinking, okay, this is an area of growth, maybe new plant is an area of growth. We're going to need someone different in a couple of years than we have now. How do you identify that in a job role?
Fortunately for us, the requirements of the roles themselves don't change that much over time. If a role is an initiator type of role, it is one, or if it's a technical specialist role. We're not in the IT world. I joke with people that we're in the Stone Age or the Bronze Age when it comes to technology. So our business change occurs at a rapid pace in our business, but the evolution of technology and the evolution of how we conduct our business doesn't change at that rapid of a pace. So we've got the luxury of having an organization that from a roles and functions perspective it's been somewhat stable over time. So we know in advance the types of people that we're going to need, and we literally try to generate a pipeline. We start with interns. We try to hire interns who perform well for us, that seem to fit within the culture of our company. And then we invest in developing them over their first, 3 to 5 years of employment, so that as turnover happens or as life happens, we have people that are ready to step up when we need them to.
My guess is that this tool has probably helped Metromont to hire people for a decade or two rather than hiring people for 2 or 3 years before they burn out. Does that question make sense at all?
Yeah, it does. It does because it allows us to know where someone's fit is going to be. We
Mm-hmm.
know that we know, a technical specialist, there are many different seats within our organization that would require that type of behavioral traits. Same thing with an initiator type of role. So we know when someone comes in the door what their potential career path might be. And a secondary objective of putting them through our development program is giving them exposure to a lot of different things within our business that we tell them, you might be coming in today thinking you want to be a project manager, but you might get into estimating and say, I want to be an estimator. I really love this stuff. Or I might want to grow towards a business development role down the road. And so we're giving them the ability somewhat to find their own path as well. And so we know the traits allows us to know roughly what direction they should go in. And it's not a linear direction, and it's really more of a meandering trail through the woods. And we let them find their own way at times.
This is so helpful because I guess this leads into one of my other questions I wanted to ask you today, and that is a tool is a good tool is phenomenal. There's no complaints about good tools. Having said that, there's a complexity, and you've said this so many times, both in our first interview and today. There's a complexity to humans that no single tool can incorporate into what it's measuring, right? Tools are there for a specific purpose. So how do you start to take into account people's complexity? How do you wrap your mind around that? How do you help yourself and the organization work with every human, which is complex?
So this to me is the beauty of the traits tool. The traits tool takes takes job performance, which is human related and infinitely complex, and it takes human behavior, which is infinitely complex, and it boils them down into some very simple, very understandable things that you can relate to within your organization. Now, we're fortunate in that we've got a large number of roles that are of one type and a large number of roles that are of another type. So there's almost a bifurcation of different types of roles. So it's a little simpler for us than it might be for other companies. It takes something that is infinitely complex. And if you take the time to understand your culture, your company, your roles, and identify what's required of high performance in those roles, the tool allows you to increase your probability of success. It and that is more important than someone's intelligence level. It's more important than their education level. Might not be more important than their emotional intelligence level, which is very often the differentiating factor because it allows them to manage relationships. But it allows you to get them in a place where they can experience success early on and be motivated.
Hmm.
They don't hate coming to work. And so to me, it takes something that is very complex. And in my mind, I've got so much experience with it. It's actually very, very simple. And it's almost prescriptive within our organization. And as I look at the latter stages of my career, one of my goals, legacy is to teach others that are coming along behind me the why and the how of using the traits tool and really helping them understand why it's important to be very careful when you deviate from, one role to the next. Dwayne put it to me very bluntly, very early on. He said, if you take someone that is an implementer and you put them in an initiator role, your maximum performance level expectation should be 50%. And everywhere I've been, that's a failing grade. I said, you're right. You're right. He said, that person can be the best person, the best educated, the most intelligent. But if they're in a role that is the inverse of who they are naturally from a behavioral perspective, they will not perform over the long run.
Yeah, I think 50% I think is generous if it's really not a good fit. And sometimes I think about maybe an example that comes to mind is you take the shrinking wallflower who is very focused on details and is excellent. You throw them in a back corner in the dungeon somewhere and they just get loads done at a quality that no one can touch. And you put them in door-to-door sales and they are going to fail miserably. And it's not because they're a bad person. It's exactly what you're saying. It's not because they're incompetent or they lack intelligence. It's because that's not the fit for them. That's not where they're going to shine, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, they're not gonna hit enough doors to sell anything.
They might not make to the first one, right?
Knocking. Yeah, they're not knocking.
Exactly. Okay, so let's talk about another assessment because you mentioned in our last interview that you use another assessment as well. What is the other assessment that you use?
Well, the other assessment we use is something it's called the Judgment Index, and it is based on what is known as the Hartman Value Profile. And it's a little bit of a strange assessment, but it gives you some really valuable insight into the things that a person or a person's value system. You know,
Mm.
we all think in certain ways, and our thoughts are based primarily upon the things that we value. And those values lead to thoughts, which then lead to action and help augment performance. So we the way I look at it, the way we've built our organization is we've said, okay, the first thing we want to achieve fundamentally is as close as possible alignment with the performance traits in a job and the natural behavioral traits of the person. And we've learned over time where certain deviations in those natural traits and the job traits are successful and maybe are beneficial. Like, for example, over time, I've seen and noticed that the millennial generation, the technical specialist in the millennial generation, is a lot more social than the older generation. So we know that they have to be technical specialists, but they need to interact with people to make their job rewarding. Whereas, you know, your older engineers, they didn't want to interact with hardly anybody. They wanted to be left alone, let them do their jobs. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that the performance of any organization, just think of it as a simple math problem. Decisions are made every day. Some are good, some are bad. The more good decisions that you make, the higher the performance of the organization is going to be over time. So we're hedging our bet that the judgment index helps us evaluate the level of quality that people make decisions in the areas of relational abilities and skills, processes or tasks, and overall, or what we would call big picture thinking, strategic type thinking. And there's a lot of components underneath all of these things that we look at, but we seek to find people who are better than average, definitely much better than average from a decision making capacity perspective, and combine that with the traits profile to get them in the right seat on the bus. And so we're hedging our bet that we've got people capable of making good decisions. If we teach them the frame of reference around which good decisions are made by teaching them our business, you know, what we talked about earlier, then over time, we're going to have an organization that performs well independently of a lot of direction. And it's not to say we don't provide direction, we don't need direction, we don't give direction. But in the construction world and at the pace we operate at, we have to make decisions all the time. And we want to make sure that we're making the best decisions we can make.
Hmm.
But those two tools together, for us, it may not be for everybody, but for us, we've learned how to apply them. And the judgment index goes, it is more complex than the traits tool as far as the information it provides. And it gives us some things that we've learned that are red flags. So there are things within that tool, for example, it measures how much do you value the difference between yourself and someone else. And that difference can be, it could be hair color, it could be skin color, it could be ethnic background, whatever. And if someone grossly undervalues those differences, then you can have someone that can't work in a multicultural environment. Well, we can't have that because we are very much a multicultural environment in our plants. And we have noticed since we started using that particular tool, I'm going to knock on wood when I say this, but we've noticed fewer and fewer issues around those types of events that you would expect in a construction manufacturing environment. It measures somebody's propensity for entitlement. So if someone has, you go from seeing work as a reward to needing to be rewarded for the work that you're doing. And the other extreme is why should I have to work to get what I want? Well, there's a spectrum, and we have a cutoff along that spectrum that we try not to hire people beyond. And we've noticed since I've started working here, we've noticed a significant decrease in workplace theft within our plants. We, knock on wood again, we almost never have it. And when I first came to work for the company, we had a lot of it. So the two tools together work to give a relevant picture for us to be able to say, okay, one, where's the right place for this person within our organization? And two, are they cut of the right cloth to fit within our culture to be able to make good decisions down the road? Ideally, as a leader, you want to hire capable and competent people. Your job as a leader is not to provide them direction. It's to clear the obstacles from their past so that they can take good action and make good decisions on their own. And they don't get distracted by the things that they don't need to spend time on. So that's been our whole premise for building our organization. And in parts of it, we've been more successful than others. But I do think that it's had a big part of building the culture that we've had and building the quality of people that we've attracted over the last decade or two.
I get this.
But it all started with traits. It all started with the traits profile.
Yeah, I get the sense as you're talking here that these two tools together has actually made HR a lot simpler, or that the problems that come to HR are far decreased compared to not using these tools. And because not using these tools, you got people who are upset because they don't know their role. They're not fitting their role. They're getting frustrated with everything around because there's a lot of stress for them. And then on the other hand, you go, if they're not fitting the culture, that's also going to be a stressor. So my guess, coming from a stress perspective, is that you got a lot less HR issues when it comes to that.
For the most part, yes, I would agree with that. I would say that, say we didn't have either one of these tools available to us, then we're relying purely on biased human judgment to make decisions about who can do what role. And when I first came to the company, that's how we did things. And we made all kinds of mistakes and had all kinds of failures in hiring because of that. Now that we have these two tools, we at least have something that has a common vernacular or vocabulary within our organization that gives us reasons to have conversations around things that are really important when we go to make a hiring decision. So we have something now that's quantifiable to discuss so that when we do make a decision, we know the pros, the cons, we know the coaching and the development opportunities. We even know the potential conflicts between the person we're hiring and their future supervisor, and we try to work through those. Mm-hmm. Because the job ultimately of every leader is not to have the group adapt to them. They have to adapt to each individual within the group. And the traits and the judgment index assessments that we use, those profiles, allow us to make our leaders more intelligent along those lines and help them serve their people better, because that's what being a leader is all about. It's not about leading and being in front. It's about being behind and propping up and serving.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Again, an idea that comes to mind is, you get the business founder. Now your organization's a lot older than probably most that you come across, but you got this organization founder, super initiator, and maybe probably if he's growing the company, fantastic at identifying some of these traits, just inherently very, very skilled at this. Okay. And let's say he or she, again, the succession planning starts to take place. And so that person never needed, in a smaller organization, all these different tools. I mean, could it have helped? Yes, but they might not have needed it. But you come to that second generation of leadership, and now things start to fall apart, because they're not only are they not the Bill or Joan or whoever it was leading from the beginning, but they don't have the same skill set, or they assume that they're going to have the same skill set, and things can fall apart quickly. You're smiling. What's coming to mind right now?
Well, I laugh because your initial description perfectly described the founder of our business. This was a kid. His name was Captain Pennell, and he built a dam to generate. He privately built a dam across a river to generate electric power, and the U.S. government came in and told him, no, we can't have you doing this. And he built bridges without permits from the Army Corps of Engineers because the people needed the bridge to get their goods to market. He was that guy, and he was out there getting things done. He's also the guy that was court-martialed for getting boots for his soldiers in World War One. He did not take no for an answer. And then the second generation, Mr. Pennell, Dick Pennell, as we know him, he was very different, much more mild-mannered. Sons tend to be different from their fathers in a lot of ways. Was much more skilled on the EQ side of things, beloved by many, and a very astute businessman. So he experienced a lot of success because of his EQ.
Hmm.
That was the gap he chose to fill as a young man, to be different from his father. And then we became successful with the third generation, which is highly unusual in most organizations, because we had ended up with a leader that went through a transformation and a letting go, and he surrounded himself with an awful lot of good people. And he was basically born and bred into the role that he has today and has filled for the last, oh golly, 40 years probably. Um, but he will tell you that it's the people and the team around him that has allowed the company to be successful. And the thing that he's done is he's provided guidance where guidance is needed, and he's provided correction when correction is needed. But for the most part, he's allowed us to do our jobs. And he's been really good about allowing quality people, and almost all our leaders fit the traits profile that's required of the job that they're performing. And he stayed out of their way. And we built a very successful company as a result.
This is fascinating. I want to, again, respect your time. I appreciate that you've come helping us out with this next interview, getting over a cold here on your own time. But two takeaways, big takeaways that I'm going to take away from the second interview, Jason. One is, again, dealing with humans' complexity is really important. And yes, tools are going to be really important. Objectivity is going to be important. And we need to learn and grow. It's not an excuse to stop thinking or to stop communicating. The second huge takeaway is going to come from that last anecdote of these three generations of leaders in your company. And that is that three very different people, three people leading the exact same organization, although it didn't look the same at all points, but people who used their strengths in the right ways. And where they had weaknesses, they mitigated that. They helped it along by finding the right people or leading in a different way, changing the role in some ways so that they would still grow the company or lead the company in a way that fit the company. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And we're talking, what, three generations, much less three different people. So the way they had to lead from generation to generation has changed. The thing about our company is that you get back to that adaptability and that entrepreneurial spirit. All three family members that have come through the company to this point, they've all had that spirit to some extent. and some one or two of them stronger than others, and they certainly managed it a little bit differently amongst themselves. But they all knew what they wanted. They all were smart enough to figure out how to get it. And Captain Pennell, it was more command and control because that's what society wanted then. His son was more, all right, we've got to learn to be good to people and relate to people. And there are many, many businessmen who owe their success to him and his mentorship. And his son has been more of the quiet behind the scenes leader that wants to manage the technical aspect of the business, loves the manufacturing side, and would rather his team just take care of things. And to his credit, he's put together a great team and allowed us to do it.
I'm really grateful for interviews with people who come from organizations like this, like yours, Jason, where Metromont has had so many changes. I'm thinking about, you talked about the First World War, how different the world is, how different people think, how different people interact, what the difference in immigration has been, in population, in how, I mean, the US is the global power. It was not in 1917, right? So there are very, very different scenarios from a cultural, historical perspective. And yet, again, you can find similarities among this with leaders, with people who are going to get things done. We've still got to grow and build our skill set. But yeah, this is brilliant. I really appreciate this. I'm going to be contemplating this over the next couple of days before I actually put the notes together and edit this, because I want to make sure that I'm putting together my thoughts at the end of this really well. Jason, thank you so much. I appreciate this so much. Thank you for your time. It's valuable. Appreciate it.
It's most definitely my pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
As I've done for the last few interviews here, I just want to take a chance to think through some of the major takeaways for me and summarize some of the things that Jason was talking about. Once we start using objective tools in work, we can then see things far more clearly with others around us. Basically, what Jason was talking about was taking bias out of the picture. We are biased creatures because we're humans. That's okay. That's not a bad thing. Having said that, it's very valuable to have tools that can help take some of that bias out so that we can make better decisions for our organization. Jason's example of Clemson's defensive coordinator was really good here, of just going, hey, like this guy was a technical specialist. He needed to be a leader. He's smart. He's bright. He's fantastic. Wasn't the right guy for that specific role. Now, the tragedy of losing people because we haven't placed them in a position to succeed is terrifying to me. If we can lose, I mean, it's one thing to hire a couple of times until we find the right person. To me, that's almost like everyone expects that to happen. It doesn't need to. And one of my greatest desires in this podcast is that people will realize that and to stop expecting to have to hire 2, 3, 4, 5 times to get the right person. But the other side of that, and the far greater tragedy, is when we have that perfect person in our organization. And then they're excelling, they're doing so well, and we put them in a place of failure. Now, the opposite is also true. I asked for 2 examples, one on either side, and Jason gave me the other one, his story of getting it wrong with somebody who did excel. And the problem was that he was focusing on the objective assessment correctly, but where there was a mistake was with what the role required. This goes back to that first interview and the kind of the outro that I did where I said, hey, listen, focus on the job description. Make sure we have job descriptions that are fantastic. I'm actually bringing somebody on in a little while here. It's probably a few interviews away still, but bringing somebody on who is going to describe job descriptions on a completely different level and really prepare you for help with that. One quote, again, out of there were many quotes that I really enjoyed here, and I'm gonna actually paraphrase this, but Jason said something along the lines of, it takes something extremely complex, and if you are willing to learn to use it, will give you a greater chance of success. I love this statement because it means that it saves a company a ton of money up front due to hiring mistakes, as well as a ton of money in the long term because you are hiring people that are far more efficient and successful in their roles. Again, both short-term and long-term. Both the employer and the employee does better in these situations. And again, I'm constantly thinking of both sides to this. Of course, the organization needs to do well, but the organization does well when you're placing the right people in the right position, which then has a great benefit to the employee, to the person that is doing work on a daily basis and putting in the effort to fulfill themselves. Really, we spend so much time and life doing work that if we're not enjoying it, that is a very sad thing. Employees will experience success and are far more motivated. Now, this statement, where this paraphrase and the thinking of taking the extremely complex and then taking time to learn from it, and you'll have greater success. This is all around minute 30. So feel free to go back and listen again. Jason said that getting this right is more important than a person's intelligence or education. I'm going to repeat that. Getting this right is more important than a person's intelligence or education. What is getting this right? He was talking about getting personality right. How is somebody wired? And what is required in a specific role, and how do you match these together? Because that's where the magic happens in business. Learning how to apply tools is far more important than trying to get a quick fix. That is also something that I learned from this, that Jason has become a master of this. He isn't somebody who's trying to offload to a third party, hey, just do everything for us. We don't want to think anymore. He's saying, I care about what I'm doing and I want this organization to be as good as possible. And so I'm going to take the time to learn the tool. Rather than a quick fix, I'm going to invest in the people who will be using these tools. And then that is so important as well. One of the last things Jason said is something along the lines of a vital job of a leader is to remove obstacles from your workforce so that they can perform better. Again, I'll finish off with this quote or this paraphrase one more time. One vital job of leader is to remove obstacles from your workforce so that they can perform better.